തുടങ്ങിക്കോ ലൈവ് ഇട്ടുണ്ട്.
ക്ലാസ്സിനൊന്ന് കയറിക്കോട്ടെ.
Good evening.
നിന്റെ ഫോൺ സ്റ്റക്കായി. ഹായ് ഏട്ടാ, തുടങ്ങട്ടെ.
മൈക്ക് ഓഫ്.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amrita, District Coordinator from Kozhikode, Kerala, ICOR Foundation, hosting today's webinar session. This webinar is organized by ICOR Foundation in collaboration with the Department of History, SSB. It's pleasure to welcome Speaker for the day, Dr. C. George Thomas, Chairman of Kerala State Biodiversity Board, Dr. Joan Boss, Director of STELS, Anushri, Assistant Professor, SSB College, Jishnu, Founder of ICOR Foundation, Program Convener, Gokul, Program Coordinator, National Committee members, Zonal Coordinators, State Coordinators, and volunteers of ICOR Foundation to this webinar on biodiversity organized 2021. We welcome all the participants and viewers for today's. ICOR Foundation is an outcome of recognition of young environment conscious minds towards emerging ecological issues like global warming, pollution, deforestation, poaching, natural calamities, etc. ICOR Foundation, under conservation NGO, registered under the Indian Trust Act for Darpan, Niti Aayog, Government of India. Since its foundation is on creating environmental awareness among public, especially for school and college level students, through various academic and non-academic activities like celebrating days of ecological importance, conducting webinars, seminars, workshops, quiz, competition, and other activities. 21. United Nations proclaimed 22nd May the International Day for Biological Diversity of increasing understanding and issues. Biodiversity Day 2021 is being celebrated and slogan, "We are part of solution," which is chosen to be in continuation of momentum generated in our solutions are in our nature. 8 points of species on our planet, and we are one among them. We share the earth and habitats with so many other forms of life. And yet most of the built habitats seldom in respect existence and respect for other forms of life had been an integrate. We have considered rivers, animals, forests, and sacred traditionally. Festivals and religious customs have been centered around them. It's time to reawaken our consciousness towards nature and actively contribute towards the protection and conservation of Earth's biodiversity. Now, let me introduce speaker for today's webinar, Dr. C. George Thomas. Sir, the former
participating in this webinar. Well, from 2000 onwards, 2000 AD onwards, we are celebrating this important World Biodiversity Day on May 22nd. So before that, we were celebrating this on December 29, but the world leaders thought that, or they realized that celebrating an event like this on December 29 may not have. So they changed it to May 22 from 2000 onwards. Well, we are celebrating several days like this related to environment. Okay, so just recently we celebrated the World Earth Day. That was on April 22. Okay, and in March there were 3 international days. On March it was World Forestry Day. March 22 it was World Water Day, and March 23 it was World Meteor Day. In February we also celebrated an important, it is concerned with what is related to biodiversity, the World Wetland Day. World Wetland Day, February 2. Of course, wetland is an ecosystem. Biodiversity, we also consider ecosystem biodiversity. And another important one, which we are going to celebrate, is 5th. That is, of course, World Day. If you can even add in July or World Food Day, which October 16th, and so on. Well, apart from weather, these days are changing in the attitude of people, or in the attitude of world nations or world organization, is a moot point. Of course, there are some changes, of course, in addition to simply attending some talks, or simply planting some trees, or some other kind of things. A sea change should be there in the minds and attitude of people. Okay, so the slogan which has been mentioned here for this year, we are part of the solution. Okay, but we are part of the problem. That is the biggest problem here. We are part of the problem. We are the problem. In other ways, who creates all the problems on Earth, all the pollution, environmental issues, biodiversity loss, and so much and so forth. Everything is the creation of human beings. Probably maybe due to population growth, probably due to over-exploitation of natural resources, including water, then agriculture in areas which are not naturally suited for agriculture. So many problems are plaguing humanity, and now we are in the midst of a world pandemic. Okay, so my task is to just introduce the topic. Probably all of you may have been studying about biodiversity, and biodiversity is not a new term. It has been coined only in 1985, and in most of school syllabus and college syllabus, the topic on biodiversity is included. And some universities, it is a compulsory paper for all graduates. Anyway, I will start with some basics. Then we may go to some more advanced topics. Okay. So now I'll start. Can you see the screen? Hello?
Yes, sir. Now it is visible. Sir, before that, I should need to say something to the audience that that's a request that kindly mute your camera and microphone throughout the program unless you address the chat option to ask questions. And please cooperate with us. Wishing you all a very good session. Thank you.
Okay, so audience, please mute your camera as well as the mic. Otherwise, there will be some disturbances. Anyway, see the second slide also you can see, isn't it? Second one. So I am just
Yes, sir.
testing whether it is audible. So the screen mode, full screen mode is also okay?
No, sir. It is not in a slide share view.
Oh. Okay, I'll check. Okay, right?
No.
You can see the slide.
Presentation, I think the presentation has gone.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir. Now it is visible.
Okay, right. So I'll start with the very basic, the very definition of biodiversity. So you can define this biodiversity in any way. Simply speaking, it is the biological diversity, the diversity within species, interspecific diversity, intraspecific. So all these things are inherent in the definition for biodiversity. Okay, so we can say the diversity within species and ecosystem. Probably, for example, you know the diversity between species. But within species means, for example, if you consider rice, so we can say there are about 50,000 land races or cultivars in rice. In the same species, you may find so many varieties sometimes, botanical varieties, and sometimes you may find cultivated varieties. So in crops which are grown by human, them cultivar, CV, a contraction of cultivated varieties, CV. But if they are natural, we use the term botanical variety. 1 minute. അങ്ങോട്ട് വിളിക്കാം, ഒരു മീറ്റിംഗിലാണ്. ഹലോ, ഞാൻ അങ്ങോട്ട് വിളിക്കാം. Sorry, I had to mute my mobile phone. Well, the term biodiversity is a contraction of the two words, biological diversity. It was first coined in 1985 by Watson. So he belongs to National Research Council, USA. And but Edward Wilson, he was a person, he was a great ecologist, and he is sometimes considered as the father of biodiversity. He popularized the term, Edward Wilson. So he has worked extensively on biodiversity and made it a mark. And you might be knowing that in 19 convention on biodiversity, actually, so this particular term, it was coined in 1985, and in 1987, our common future, a landmark report by none other than Norwegian Prime Minister Brundtland, Gro Harlem Brundtland. Her name was like that, Norwegian Prime Minister. It was under the leadership of this Brundtland. The report, Our Common Future, came out, and in fact paved the way for our Earth Summit, which happened in 1992 at Rio de Janeiro. So I'll come to that later. Okay, so this is the accepted definition for biodiversity, and it includes. So whenever we say biodiversity, everybody thinks of the species diversity. So in addition to species diversity, we have to consider the diversity within species and the diversity in the ecosystem. Specific genetic variations and traits within species and different ecosystem, that may be marine, that may be aquatic, that may be terrestrial, where human societies live or they depend, coastal areas, forests, wetlands, grasslands, mountains, and deserts, and so on. So all these are aspects of biological diversity or biodiversity. So we can think of biodiversity in three levels or in three ways. So species diversity is actually a measure of how many different species are present in a given area. So for that matter, in Kerala, also it is applicable for other states also. Here we have made plant biodiversity register, PBR. So how many plants are there in a particular panchayat? So that is called plant biodiversity register. So that has already been completed, and now we are working for ePBR, electronic, because so if you prepare a plant biodiversity register and kept it in the office, it is of no use. But if you want to get information, so you have to access it electronically. Then genetic diversity of inherited genetic variability contained within a population of species. So that is what I told about cultivars, land races, and so the last ecosystem diversity that exists in nature. So why is biodiversity important? So I did not dwell more on this particular. So everything depends as a web of life, including humans. So there are producers, there are consumers. Okay, so each species of vegetation and each creature has a place on the earth and plays a vital role in the circle of life. Okay, plants, animal, and insect, they interact and depend upon one another for what each offers. So food, shelter, oxygen, soil enrichment. So there are decomposers and so on. So all these are found as a web. So each individual species is part of this nature, and they have their own niche. Okay, so maintaining a wide diversity of species in each ecosystem is therefore necessary to preserve the web of life that sustain all living things. So you cannot simply exclude one species, and if one species goes extinction, so that would be a great loss to the nature. So for that matter, Edward Wilson. So I told you about this particular gentleman who was considered as the father of biodiversity. So he said, it is reckless to suppose that biodiversity can be diminished indefinitely without threatening humanity itself. So that means if you go on destroying biodiversity, that ultimately tell upon the humanity itself. Well, so these are some of the things or some of the benefits of biodiversity. This again, I don't think I should elaborate. We know we get food, fiber, and some days water. It is essential for sustainable development and human sustainable development. Again, it's a new terminology which was coined in 1992 as a part of Earth Summit, sustainable use. And we had to do agriculture for food and fiber, and for it to a certain extent, it provides resilience to climate change. And we know that all producers consume carbon dioxide for their food production, and when to do that, it helps in the intake of greenhouse gas emissions. And carbon is also stored as a micronutrient in the cells of life form. Sequestration of carbon is also happening, and it supports human health, and it provides medicine, it provides jobs in agriculture, fisheries, forestry, and many other sectors. So even in the event of hunting and gathering, which human beings are doing agriculture. Okay, and And now United Nations, they have declared sustainable development goals. So Millennium Development Goals, the world nations or world bodies could not achieve fully. So the United Nations, they proclaimed sustainable development goals, so which is to be achieved by 2013. So there are some 17 sustainable developmental goals, and some of these sustainable development goals. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. Sustainable Development Goal 1, zero hunger. So Sustainable Development Goal 1, zero hunger. So there are several agenda for that matter. So it continues up to 17. And there is one sustainable development goal, that is life above soil. Life above soil. So that means all the terrestrial organisms are included and that life above soil and life below water. So that means all the aquatic organisms, the life which we see in the seas. So that kind of things are included under life below water. So then, of course, as a part of biodiversity, we also consider microbial biodiversity. So they also store carbon and other greenhouse gases beneath our feet in the earth. So I'll come to these development goals later. Ecological services. So in addition to direct services of biodiversity, so these are some of the ecological services. It maintains a balance in nature, biological productivity, regulation of climate. So I did not elaborate, and we don't have time also. Degradation of waste. So there are decomposers there. So they do this, microorganisms and small animals present in the soil. Cleaning of air and water, cycling of nutrients, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, such kind of thing. Then control of potential pest and disease causing species, so the so-called biological control, which we advocate in agriculture. Then detoxification of soil and sediments, the stabilization of land against erosion, the so-called biological methods for soil conservation. So such kind of thing. Then carbon sequestration and global climate change. Then lastly, maintenance of soil fertility. So several microorganisms are involved in that. Then what are the threats to biodiversity? So there are natural causes which we may not be able to curb, but there are several anthropogenic causes. So natural causes include narrow geographical area, low population, low breeding rate, natural disasters. So such kind of things, probably dinosaurs. So at the time when dinosaurs were roaming around the globe, humans were not there. Of course, some forms might be there, but its extinction was due to some natural causes. Then anthropogenic causes that include habitat modification. So when you cut down trees from an area and start agriculture, this habitat modification. So when you level an area, so when you put a quarry there, mining. So this kind of, so when you start an industrial establishment in a particular area, this is our habitat modification. Then hunting. Of course, hunting can destroy certain, if you continuously go for poaching, hunting, and so on. So that again threatens the existence of certain species. Then overexploitation of selected species of plants and animals. Of course, humans started agriculture some 10,000 years ago when he discovered that because of his overexploitation of plants, edible plants from nature. So humans are starving because of this phenomena. So they started agriculture some 10,000 years ago. They cultivating some selected edible plants, which they were able to collect from forest. Okay. Then invasion by exotic species, invasive alien species. So this invasive alien species is a major threat affecting biodiversity. So when we say invasive aliens, that includes plants as well as animals. So in the case of plants, there are several plants which were introduced knowingly or unknowingly. Certain aliens like what do you call Chromelina odorata, that's called, that's a common name is cyanide. Okay. Another one, Lendana camera. Lendana camera, of course, it has got an ornamental value, but it's a major weed and it destroys biodiversity. And recently, another major weed which inhabit forest, fringes of forest, and which also invade inner areas of forest. Senna spectabilis. Senna spectabilis. Senna spectabilis. Then there are some weeds which affects our aquatic system. Water hyacinth, Iconocrassicus, then Salvinia molesta, the Kariba weed or the African pine, or Kariba weed. Its common name is Kariba weed or African pine. And we can go on. Another Singapore daisy, Spaghetticola trilobata, So there are some around 100 invasive alien plant species have been identified. Similarly, you can also list some invasive fishes in our aquatic system, and some insects which were introduced knowingly or unknowingly. So these are all invasive exotic species, and they may destroy the biodiversity. So it may also pay for human-animal conflict. So in many, especially in Kerala, in Wayanad region, the human-animal conflict is a grave threat. And what happens is, so when these Senna spectabilis, the plants like Senna spectabilis, inhabit an area, so that destroy the grasses. So that grasses may not be able to come up there, and the animals cannot eat these Senna spectabilis. Okay, so there would be a dearth of feed for the animals, and in turn, when they were not able to find food in forest, they may come out in the dwelling area. Then, of course, pollution happens because of industries, and from agriculture also pollution happens. So it can be buoyant sources and non-buoyant sources. Okay. Then hunting, I already mentioned about that. Then global warming and climate change. So these are also in certain area we may not be able to cultivate crops, and crops may not be able to adapt to the new environment. Agriculture as such, agriculture is actually artificial. You cannot say agriculture is not natural, because human beings started agriculture only 10,000 years. So before that, probably we can say it was natural. Hunting and gathering, whether it was natural, we can say it is natural. But the intervention of human beings usurps the way of nature, the balance of life in nature, we can say. And domino effect. So when we domino effect means, so when all other kind of things are happening, it has got overall effect. So that is the meaning of domino effect. Then how many species are there? So this is a question we usually ask. Okay, so the student who introduced the topic, she told 8.7 million. It was an estimate, and nobody is sure whether there are 80.7 million species in the world. And scientists put up several estimates, and they say between 5 and 10 million, and 3 to 30 million. So it can go up to 30 million. So if you consider microorganisms, we know we do not know how many microorganisms are there in the soil, in the air. So it can go up to 40 kilometers in the atmosphere. So some organisms may be there. So anyway, it can range from 3 to 10, 30 million. And a conservative estimate by Wilson, it is 5. Wilson means our father of biodiversity, 5 and 10 million. Then a recent estimate by is 8.7 million. Okay, and every year around 13,000 species are discovered and added to 1.4 million species that have been catalogued so far. So we were able to catalog 1.4 million species so far. So every year the task is going on, and still we conclude that only 20% of the species have been discovered. That means 80% of the species is not discovered, not catalogued, only 20%. Well, this Convention on Biological Diversity, it was an important event in the biodiversity conservation. And this Kerala State Biodiversity Board, or for that matter, biodiversity boards of each state, or the National Biodiversity Authority, NBA. So NBA, its headquarters is at Chennai, National Biodiversity Authority. It is an apex body all over India. Its headquarters is at Chennai, and each state is supposed to have a biodiversity board. And these kind of things came into existence from this Convention on Biological Diversity. Okay, so it happened at the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, Rio de Janeiro. Okay, so it was originally called United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, but usually we refer to as Earth Summit. And they coined the term sustainable development. So what is sustainable development? Sustainable agriculture. Okay, so sustainable development means development for the present without jeopardizing the development of the future. So you can do anything, but when you do something to the nature, think twice. What will be its follow for the future generation? So that is the meaning of sustainable development. You can do anything. You can utilize natural resources. You can start an industry, but think. So you may live for about 60 or 70 years, but what happens? So the fallout, what will be the fallout for the future generation? Think twice. So that was the meaning of sustainable development. And in agriculture, the equivalent term is sustainable agriculture. Okay. So sustainable use of resources, pesticides, fertilizers, crop varieties, and so on. Then in that particular 1992 Rio Summit, they have finalized Agenda 21. So what do you mean by 21? That is agenda for the 21st century. That is Agenda 21, agenda for the 21st century. And as a part of this convention, this particular Rio Summit, the Convention on Biological Diversity was signed. At the time, some 150 nations were there. Now, more than 170 people are signatories to this particular important Convention on Biological Diversity. So, in addition to biological diversity, the convention recognized that biological diversity is about more than. In addition to plants, animals, microorganisms are their ecosystem, it is also about people and our need for food security, medicines, fresh air and water, shelter, and a clean and healthy environment. So, in addition to the usual definition of biodiversity, the convention considered the need for food security, water security, medicines, fresh air, climate change. Of course, climate change convention was a part of, as a corollary of this 1982. shelter and a clean and healthy environment in which we live. So the CBD has three main objectives. The conservation of biological diversity, that's number one. The sustainable use of the components of biological diversity. Number three, the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. These three are endowed there. So access and benefit sharing. So, there are several industries, several uses for biological resources in addition to food, fiber, and clothing. So medicines are there. There are several industries which uses these bioresources, and you can go to forest and collect wood, for that matter, sandalwood for some other kind of things. That honey you can collect it from forest. So all these kind of things, we must ensure that fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilization of genetic resources. So it should not be a monopoly of a particular individual or a group of individuals or a nation. It should be shareable to all. See, so for access and benefit sharing, another treaty, the Nagoya Protocol. So this Nagoya Protocol is on access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits, arising from their utilization of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So it is an international agreement which aims at sharing the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources. So it came to force in 2014. So Nagoya is a place in Japan. Well, I told you about the Sustainable Development Goals, and the two directly linked to biodiversity, SDG 4 and SDG 15, SDG 14, life below water, and SDG 15, life on land. And there are all other sustainable development goals we can relate to biodiversity. For example, SDG 2 on zero hunger. So in zero hunger itself, there is this target 2.3. It calls for a doubling of agricultural production. Why? Because the human population is rising. By 2050, probably we have to double our production to satisfy the needs of the people at the time. Okay, and for this has been given as an example. For increasing the production, we need the help of pollinators. Okay, so the value of pollinators has been described here. So it is between $235 billion and the global food production, its value has been estimated as $577. Okay. Well, see, from 1992, this Convention on Biological Diversity has been signed. Then signing is one, and implementing various provisions is another. Okay, so the world bodies were at it, and in 2000 they declared a 10-year period or biodiversity decade. The parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity set the goal to reduce the rate of biodiversity loss by the year 2010. But this target has not been met. Then another one, this Aichi targets. Aichi is again a place in Nagoya. Aichi, A-I-C-H-E, is a place in Nagoya, that is in Japan. So they declared 2011 to 20 as the decade of biodiversity, and set up some 20 Aichi targets. And 2020 is already over. And we realized that we were not able to achieve the targets. Probably we can say by the end of 2019 and 2020, world nations could not do anything because the world was paralyzed because of the impact of COVID-19. And now we may go for some other targets. Okay. Then after this, I see biodiversity targets. So no target has been put forward, but we expect that something concrete would come out. And another international treaty is the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety. So biosafety is also important because in certain countries, they begin to use genetically modified organisms. So if you are using such kind of things, genetically altered, so some biosafety should be there. It should not affect our biodiversity. The Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety to the Convention on Biological Diversity, it is all sequel. It happened as a sequel to the original Convention on Biological Diversity. It's an international agreement which aims to ensure the safe handling, transport, and use of living modified organisms. So that is the term they use, but not GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Living modified organisms, LMOs, resulting from modern biotechnology that may have adverse effect on biological diversity, taking also into account risk to human health. So it is in force from 2003, although it was adopted in 2000. It entered into force on 2003. Then something about biodiversity hotspots. So you might have heard of this term, biodiversity hotspots. And as on today, there are 36 biodiversity hotspots. In fact, this term was coined by Norman Myers. And to qualify an area or to declare a particular spot as biological hotspot, it should qualify two conditions. One is the area must have at least 0.5% of the world's total vascular plant species as endemic flora. So endemic means native, 0.5% of the world's total vascular plant species. So this 0.5% comes to 1,500. So in other words, that particular area should have at least 1,500 species of vascular plants as endemics. So in other words, it must have a high percentage of plant life found nowhere else on the planet. In other words, it is irreplaceable. Okay. And second condition is it has to have lost at least 70% of its original habitat, or it must have 30% or less of its original natural vegetation. In other words, it must be a threatened area. Okay, so that is the meaning of biodiversity hotspots, threatened area. Some problems are there for the species, such kind of things. And Myers originally in 1988, he covered, or he in his paper, he covered 11.8% of the total land area. And he narrated about 25 hotspots. Now it is 36 hotspots, and the area has increased. So these are the 36 hotspots in various parts of the world. Okay, and there are 4 biodiversity hotspots in India. The Himalaya, number 1. Indo-Burma, number 2. So Himalaya means it includes the entire Indian Himalayan region. That includes Pakistan, Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, China, and Myanmar. Then Indo-China, entire northeastern India, except Assam and Andaman, group of islands. Okay, so the area comes under which comes under Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and southern China are also excluded. And Sundalands include Nicobar group of islands, and Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Brunei, Philippines. And number 4, the state guards and Sri Lanka. So the Kerala comes under Kerala, Western Ghats. It is a hotspot. So that includes Sri Lanka also. So this is the picture of showing these 4. That is, one is this. This is the Himalayas. Okay. And Indo-Burma, this region, Indo-Burma, and Sundalands. This is Sundalands. And Western Ghats and Sri Lanka, somewhere here. Okay. And something about biodiversity conservation also. I hope many of you, botany students and others, environmental science, they might have studied this biodiversity conservation. Still, I repeat. So we can classify this biodiversity conservation into 2: in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. In situ conservation means on-site conservation. Okay. Conservation of genetic resources in the natural populations. So if you conserve as a biosphere reserve or national park, such kind of things we can say in situ conservation. So it protects the inhabitants and ensures the sustainability of the environment and ecosystem. So this is some of the examples, biosphere reserve. So I did not go into detail. So there are 18 biosphere reserves. So often more than 5,000 square kilometer. Then national parks. There are about 103 national parks in India. So an area ranges from 100 to 500 square kilometers. Then wildlife sanctuaries. It's an area which is reserved for the conservation of animals only. So currently we have 551 wildlife sanctuaries, the so-called Project Tiger. So such kind of things are the wildlife sanctuaries. Then the gene sanctuary. So a gene sanctuary is an area where plants are conserved. It includes both biosphere reserve as well as national parks. And, especially for preserving the wild relatives of some cultivated plants, you can say, for example, there is one gene sanctuary in Meghalaya for conserving wild relatives of citrus. And you may wonder, as far as agricultural biodiversity is concerned, who will conserve the weeds and wild relatives? The farmers normally, they are not interested to conserve wild relatives. So this kind of initiative, this kind of gene sanctuaries is needed for that. Then community reserves. So it is a type of protected area introduced in Wildlife Protection Amendment Act of 2002 to provide legal support to community or privately owned reserves, which cannot be designated as national park or wildlife sanctuary. It's a new introduction. So this is for community. So if you go for a biodiversity park or what you call Miyawaki forest or something like that, that comes under community research. Then sacred groves. So the sacred groves, these are usually seen, especially in Kerala, there are several sacred groves which are set aside in the precincts of temples. So some these are venerated, and it is part of the temple rites, and people, because of that, people do not do any problems or destruction to these groves. So these sacred groves are also a part of in situ conservation strategies. Then comes this ex situ conservation, and it's a technique of conservation of biological diversity outside its natural habitats. Outside, targeting all levels of biodiversity such as genetics, species, and ecosystem. And it is considered as an additional measure. So of course, it is better to go for a natural biodiversity or in situ biodiversity, but that may not be possible So these zoo animals are conserved in zoos. Captive breeding, sometimes for a particular individual or an organism which is in the extinction state, we go for captive breeding and multiply its numbers. The aquarium is another ex situ conservation strategy. Then, of course, botanical gardens. And in the whole world, more than 2,000 botanical gardens are there. And you know the importance of the Calcutta Botanical or Kolkata Botanical Garden in India. Probably during the time of Britishers, they started this Kolkata. And another very famous botanical garden is that of Kew Botanical Gardens in England, Kew. And gene banks. Well, okay, I mentioned about this zoo, captive breeding, aquarium, and gene banks, you know. So in gene banks, it may be a seed bank, artificially maintained, and we also go for cryopreservation of seed material. And sometimes, you know, as a part of ex situ conservation strategy, we will not be able to cultivate. So, for example, agrobiodiversity conservation. If you want to conserve various varieties or cultivars of crops, one thing you can do is you can maintain all these things. You can cultivate these crops, varieties in a secluded area, take the harvest, clean it, and preserve it. Okay, every year you do this. That is one way. Another way is use it, conserve it in deep freezer, cryopreservation, extreme cold temperature. So you can have seed banks for that. So Biodiversity International have stationed in Rome. They do this kind of things. IRRI, International Rice Research Institute, Philippines, they also preserve seeds using this cryopreservation technology. Then you can have field gene banks. Field gene banks means, you know, so in field, you cultivate crops, varieties in small area, you harvest and store. Then, of course, you can also have in vitro gene banks for plant tissues and cell. Okay. Then pollens, chromosome, DNA for animals, being sperm, eggs, embryos, tissues, chromosomes. And these are held in short-term or long-term laboratory storage sometimes. Sometimes it may be short-term or sometimes it may be long-term. Usually cryopreserved or freeze-dried. Okay. Then something about agrobiodiversity. Okay. So when you say agrobiodiversity, the variety and variability of animals, plants, microorganisms that are used directly or indirectly for food and agriculture. For food and agriculture, that includes crops, livestock, forestry, and fisheries. So the diversity of genetic resources, that means as far as animals are concerned, various breeds like Holstein Friesian, Jersey, okay, Murrah buffalo. So they are all breeds. And species used for food, fodder, fiber, fuel, and pharmaceuticals. So in wheat, thousands of varieties are there. In rice, thousands of varieties are there. And it also includes, agrobiodiversity also includes non-harvested species. So that is there in the field. That is essential for the sustenance of agrobiodiversity. That supports production that includes soil microorganisms, predators, pollinators. Okay, and those in the wider environment that support agroecosystem. So for pasture, if you maintain pasture, we do not cultivate ranges. We do not cultivate, but we utilize that area for for maintaining animals. Agricultural, pastoral, forest, aquatic system. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, agrobiodiversity or genetic resources for food and agriculture includes harvested crop varieties, livestock breeds, fish species, non-domesticated resources within field, forest, rangeland, including tree products, wild animals, hunted for food and in aquatic. So there is a direct use, almost a direct use of crops, as well crops, animals, and fishes. Then comes this non-harvested species in production system. They are there. Okay, pollinators, butterflies, earthworms, green flies, and so on. And non-harvested. So this I have mentioned earlier. So non-harvested species in wider environment that support food production systems. So these are some of the features. I need not, because of time constraint, I'm not going to the details. Well, within these 100 years. So just for the sake of example, if you take 100 years, last 100 years from 1900 to 2020, we can, so people usually combine 75% of plant identified diversity is lost. 30% livestock breeds are at risk of extinction, 75%. And moreover, the food, it has narrowed, okay? And now, simply speaking, some 12 plants and 5 animal species supply 75% of the world's food. And mind you, if you take three cereals, which are the rice, maize, and wheat, that alone contribute 60% of calories. So you can think of how this agro biodiversity has narrowed. Okay. Yeah, well, in the beginning, I told about we can be a part of the problem, we can be a part of the solution. Just I'm winding up my discussion. So we can be a part of the problem. How we are part of the problem? So human activities in the name of development, they have inadvertently or deliberately contributed to huge losses of biodiversity. Okay, so various impacts. So imbalances have crept into nutrient exchange, climate change, pollution, loss of food diversity leading to global food security issues, land degradation, soil erosion, wetland loss, increased probability of novel diseases like the ongoing pandemic. Okay. These kind of things are evident. So these are the problems created by human beings. Economic losses estimated at 60 to 11 trillion per year have been estimated just from land degradation alone. Okay. So, and again, the risk to biodiversity can be amplified by climate change. Yeah, global temperature is rising, and we want to limit our rise in temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this Paris Climate Accord, Paris Accord is for that. We want to limit our global rise in temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So for that, we had to spend crores, millions of money, millions of dollars of money or rupees. Okay, biodiversity boosts the economy and the global ecosystem services. Yeah, it's only estimates. People estimate like this. Estimate the biodiversity in terms of even ecosystem, even the benefits of wetlands. You can put in terms of money. So people are doing like that. Anyway, we can be part of the solution. How? Humans are a part of biodiversity. We have no special rights to behave as the supreme being at the top of the hierarchy of all life forms. Okay, we are part of the biodiversity. Just identify that. Just agree with that statement. Conservation of biodiversity is pivotal for the management and restoration of various ecosystem services. Then, the encephalization of humans with the passage of time has placed a greater responsibility of taking care of ourselves along with others on the planet. That means in the evolution cycle, the humans, they became more intelligent because of the growth of brains. So that is the meaning of encephalization. So in course of time, we have to take care of ourselves along with others on the planet. That we should understand that, and we can be a part of the solution at the collective way as well as individual levels. So at collective level, many successful efforts by numerous governmental as well as non-governmental organizations at national and global levels to estimate, understand, realize the importance of and spread awareness about biodiversity. So that is what is happening at the national level, at the international level, Convention of Biodiversity, UNO, and so on. And several NGOs are also part of this. It is at the collective level. And at individual level, we can be part of the solution. How? By reading more about biodiversity, by learning more about biodiversity, appreciating and spreading awareness about it, planting more trees, consuming a variety of foods in our diets to promote biodiversity, crop diversity. So instead of always preferring some chicken or pizza, something like that, okay, not wasting food and water. So there is a great disservice to humanity, wastage of food. It is huge. So not wasting food and water, and preferably going for vegan diet, vegetarian diet, so that probably it may be difficult to support certain section of people, but we should also think about that, because 1 kilogram meat is almost equal to 20 kilograms of grains. Okay, for producing 1 kilogram of meat, you have to spend 20 kilograms of grains, and generating less waste and reusing and recycling products. So you have to take care of your waste. Okay, so don't put into the environment. So I am winding up my discussion. So within, I think, 1 hour, I have completed my lecture. Okay, thank you very much. So if you have any questions or clarification or opinion, you can make it now. Is that okay?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Now it's time for the session of discussions and clarifications. So we have some questions in the chat box and YouTube live. So let me ask. The first question that I'm going to ask from Sunita Tangapan. She's asking that, could you please explain about buffer zones?
Buffer zone.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. This buffer zone is related to forest, isn't it? Forest.
Yes, sir.
So what happens is, this forest, earlier when a forest, whether reserve forest or normal forest, the dwelling place, people were not living in the precincts of forest. So at the time, the animals, they may not enter, and the human-animal conflicts were very, very less at the time. Okay, so if you consider the cropping pattern of Kerala, so I am saying about Kerala, so people were staying in the valley regions. They were staying in the valley regions, and they were maintaining the cultivation or crop production in the mid-upland regions, and the higher regions were kept as forest or grass lands, even private lands. But now what happens is, there are literally no grasslands in Kerala. No grasslands in Kerala. Okay, so village pastures, nothing of the sort. And if you are able to put up some buffer zones, and we assume that the problem from animals, wild animals, would be less. And by law, these buffer zones have been introduced, and there are some problems for the farmers, and the dialogue is going on between farmers and legal authorities. Okay, so we can say like that.
Okay, thank you, sir. There is many other questions. So moving on to the next question, it's asked by Mahamadu. Can you explain on the current wetland conservation status of Kerala, specifically the measures taken to conserve the wetland ecosystem?
Well, when we say wetland ecosystem in Kerala, wetland is a particular ecosystem, and that includes you may be knowing about the Ramsar Convention. Similar to this Convention on Biological Diversity, this Ramsar Convention in 1971, world nations assembled at Ramsar in Iran and agreed upon a convention or a strategy or a covenant, something like that. It's a treaty wherein they're supposed to preserve wetlands of international importance as well as others. And you know that in Kerala, there are 3 Ramsar sites. Our Kuttanad Col is a Ramsar site, then Shastangkota and Ashtamudi. These are the wetlands of Ramsar site. These are Ramsar sites. Okay. And these wetlands are also under threat. Vembanad Col. Vembanad Col goes to Kuttanad. Okay, so Vembanad Col, its depth is becoming less and less. Its width is also becoming less and less because of human intervention, and the paddy fields are being converted. So these are some of the issues, and probably we may not be able to curb, or we may not be able to restore what has happened in the previous era, but now onwards, from 2000, I think it was promulgated that as taking a cut-off year 2006, no more conversion of wetlands will be allowed. And as far as paddy cultivation is concerned, I'll tell you an example. In Kerala state, in 1970s or 1960s, there were 5 lakh hectares of paddy fields, 5 lakh. And now its area is almost 3 lakh hectares or 2.5 lakh hectares. Almost half have been converted. And cultivation is done, paddy cultivation is done in 3 seasons. Virippu, Mundagan, Puncha, or first crop season, second crop season, and third crop season. Put together, in Kerala, we cultivated in an area of 8.8 lakh hectares. So that is not total area, but Virippu plus Mundayan plus Puncha. That comes to 8.8 lakh hectares. But now it is less than 2 lakh hectares, the total area of rice under cultivation. Probably more area would be there, but that is not cultivated. They are fallow. They are kept fallow. Okay, so in Kerala as well as in national level, there is a wetland act for the conservation of wetland has been promulgated at the national level. I think that this year is 2017. In Kerala, we have our own wetland conservation bill, wetland and as well as Nelvayal. In Malayalam, we usually say Nelvayar Tannirthara Samrashana Niyam, paddy lands and wetland conservation bill. Because of that, to a certain extent, we are able to curb the conversion of wetlands. I hope so. Thank you.
Okay, sir. And some participants are asking that will you send the PPT to us? Like they want the information.
Okay, so they can send an email to me. So I'll send
Okay,
to them.
sir. Okay, thank you, sir. And moving on to the next question, is asked by Sneha Chatterjee on YouTube Live. Does species diversity follow any pattern? What is the relationship between biodiversity and ecosystem stability? She's asked this as 2 questions.
One is species diversity.
Yes, the relationship between ecosystem stability and biodiversity, and the other one is species diversity follow any pattern.
Species diversity, we cannot say it follows any pattern because it depends upon the kind of vegetation. So tropical rainforest, so it has a peculiar tropic system, isn't it? So it has got big trees at the top level. Then it has got a second level of shrub or lianas in it. Then in the understory, there may be some species, not many, because everything is covered. Only shade-loving plants would be there in the understory. So, but if you go to some deserts also, biodiversity is there. Grasses also, biodiversity is there. Biodiversity is everywhere, isn't it? So it may not have any specific pattern for a species diversity, but if one species goes from that extinct, that may affect other processes. So the same number of species won't be there in a tropical area, in a subtropical area, or in Arctic area, or in a desert area, arid, semi-arid, tropical, humid tropical. So the number of the species would be different. Their pattern of coexistence would be different. And you might have studied the competition, isn't it? And association between species. So such kind of things are there. In some occasion, it may show a pattern, but we cannot generalize. Okay. And the second aspect was on biodiversity and ecosystem stability. Of course, conservation of biodiversity is important for ecosystem stability, the functions of ecosystem, its ecosystem services. Ecosystem services would be in jeopardy if biodiversity is lost. And for example, in a particular region, if you convert the entire wetlands for erecting some dwelling places, some sky-rise buildings, that will usurp the ecosystem or the natural environment of the region. It is definite. Okay. I think
Okay, sir.
that is enough.
Okay, next question from Mr. Anil Kumar. Is there any strategy to conserve biodiversity of wild varieties of crops?
Wild varieties. I told about that my example from Meghalaya, where they conserve citrus. It's a gene sanctuary. They have declared a particular area as a gene sanctuary for citrus. Okay, in a similar way, so we can think of that. Okay, but normally these wild varieties are preserved in some crop-specific research stations. I'll tell you an example. IRRI, International Rice Research Institute, they are preserving wild varieties. Okay, similarly in Kerala, in Patambi, they preserve wild varieties of rice. And in Pannu, pepper, they preserve wild varieties of pepper. And at Kozhikode, Indian Institute of Spices Research, they conserve similar wild varieties of pepper. And cardamom at Mailadambara, wild varieties. So they are maintaining wild varieties for breeding purpose. Gem blossom collection. So we have heard of this thing, gem blossom collection. And in India, the NBPGR, National Plant Genetic Resources, NBPGR under Indian Council of Agricultural Research, they are doing this. And a branch of NBPGR is there in Pollanikara, behind Kerala Agricultural University. In fact, Kerala Agricultural University has leased out some lands. I don't know exact extent of the area, and there they do all this kind of preservation techniques that include wild varieties also. Okay.
Okay, sir. Next question from Satish Revayanavar. He's asking about introduction of new species in an area will affect already available species.
Definite. It is definite. Even I don't know, some of you might have heard of this great Columbian exchange. So Columbus discovered America in 1492, isn't it? 1482 in the 15th century. And he brought several South American crops. Some of these crops are, you may be knowing, I'll tell you some examples. Cassava or tapioca as a major food crop to Kerala. Then cashew nut, then rubber, pineapple, chilies. Okay, then there are several others like this. Several ornamental plants are being brought here. Then pineapple is another example. Pineapple. Then our breadfruit. Breadfruit is an introduction. And all these introductions, and if you introduce certain species which are not accustomed to that area, that may change to a certain extent the climate of that region. And similarly, along with these crops, several weeds were also introduced. Several species of weeds. I told about some examples earlier. The Eichhornia crassipus, the water hyacinth, Salvinia mollusca, Lantana camara, Chromalina odorata, then the Parthenium, which usually see in the North Indian climates, Parthenium hysterophorus, and many weeds were also introduced. And these weeds, in turn, they affect the biodiversity of a particular area. I told you that forest example. And the crops are also affecting our system. Okay, so you cannot say if you introduce, for example, our rambutan, mangosteen, these are all introduced ones. They are all fruits. And see, we have to think of purposeful introduction of crops also as a part of biodiversity now. So now we cannot think of a biodiversity without tapioca, without cassava, because at a time when we were reeling under hunger and poverty, this tapioca come to our rescue. Okay.
Okay,
So
sir.
it affects species type differently.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Next from Blue Planet Warrior. How is India faring on the SDGP 2030? From your perspective, how many of the SDGP goals can possibly be achieved for India in general and Kerala to be specific?
Well, we just started. We have to wait. So the government as well as the world leaders, they are taking this SDGP one by one, and which has got targets, target 1, target 2, target 3, like that. And even biodiversity body is also is making our targets clear. So now we are going to revise our plan of action. See, we were asked to revise our plan of action according to the SDGP goals. So we are exactly going to do that. And we got some assistance from UNDP. We'll do that. Okay, so we hope we may be able to achieve, not 100%, at least up to 60 to 70% of these SDGP goals. So let us hope so.
And there is one more question from them. From your viewpoint, how do you foresee cheetah reintroduction in India, which was planned very recently?
What?
From your viewpoint, how do you foresee cheetah reintroduction in India, which was planned very recently?
Cheetah? What is that?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
What is that?
Cheetah.
Cheetah is an animal, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Cheetah, we introduced. How?
Cheetah reintroduction in India, that they are saying that they are planned very recently. If they are available in the presentation, means in the session, we can ask directly. If the participant
I don't know,
is there.
but if it is an introduction, it may be an introduction in zoos, because in zoo, in order to exhibit animals, we usually introduce some animal, but that would be confined to, it's a captive animal, it may not go out in zoos. So I told about that ex situ conservation. So organisms are conserved in zoo. That is okay.
Okay, sir. Next question from Diksha Arora. Sir, it is possible to shift endemic species living in a particular area to shift someone for the sake of conservation. as Indian government did to conserve penguins in India, but they can't survive at this temperature.
See, endemic species, if you want to conserve certain endemic species, so you have to recreate the environment present there. Otherwise, it cannot survive. Isn't it? So that is what we do by establishing zoo, by establishing botanical garden, and so on. So in botanical gardens, the endemic species they are bringing endemic species to there, isn't it? When you say rubber, so here it is not endemic, but it is endemic in Brazil. So we introduce rubber from Brazil because it enjoys almost a similar climate. So similar climates, if you are able to provide, probably that may survive. Otherwise, it will not survive.
Exactly, sir. And the last question from Bagrao Prasad Yadav. West coast of India, that means Kerala, the biodiversity of fish variety is less as compared to East Coast. So, what fishery is vulnerable resource in West Coast?
Yeah, see here there is a problem. Probably the fisheries sector. Uh, Earlier there was not much rules in force uh, preventing the over exploitation of fish resources from our stream, rivers, and so. Now the fisheries department they have come up, and during breeding time, especially in Malayalam, Uttapidutham. I don't know how many of you have heard about this. When the first pre-monsoon showers happens, it may be breeding time for some fishes, and it travels along with the water to streams, and this particular time is ideal for catching fish. And this has been curbed now. That may be one reason why that much problem has been pointed out by that particular student. And now it has been banned, and if anybody is caught doing this kind of poaching, he will be fined. So such kind of things are there.
Okay, thank you, sir. The questions are finished.
Okay.
Uh, um, so, it is very clear that we should strongly work to bend the curve on biodiversity laws. So, as the theme suggests, we are the part of the solution. We human beings are the part of the nature. So, we are in nature. So, we are, of course, the part of the solution too. So, in this COVID 19, this situation shown that we need a one health approach to secure the well being of people and our shared planet also. And this situation also shown that the world needs work together to resolve our common challenges. So, we all can be the part of solution. Okay, thank you, sir. We are moving to the vote of thanks session.
Okay.
Respected George Thomas, sir, our invited speaker, Chairman of Kerala State Biodiversity Board, Mr. Jishnu PA, founder of Equar Foundation, the program convener and the coordinators, my dear Equar family members, and all of you who are present here. A very good evening, all. I am Neetu, District Coordinator of Palakkad, Kerala. I, on behalf of Equar Foundation and my on behalf, a very hearty vote of thanks to Dr. George Thomas sir for sharing with us your opinions and findings today. So, a very big thank you, sir. And the point where Thomas sir told us it gives gave a great insight into the topic and also reveals some interesting facts. So I'm pretty sure that the precious knowledge will definitely help us in our future as well as in studies in day-to-day practical life. So sir also told about the conservation strategies, the importance and the major basic terms of biodiversity, and he answered very well to all the questions. Okay, again, thank you very much, sir. And further, we are grateful to our partners for today's program, STELS, NGO in Delhi, as well as PG Department of History, SSV College, Airapuram, Ernakulam, for their enormous cooperation in the events. So, on behalf of Accord Foundation, I extend my gratitude to the Director of STELS, Dr. John Bosar, and Mrs. Anushree PA, Assistant Professor in SSV College. Thank you again. And I also extend my gratitude to the Director of Accord Foundation and the program convener, coordinator, zonal coordinators, district coordinators, and volunteers for their dedicated willingness to the success of the event. Last but not least, I may like to express our sincere thanks towards all the participants present here for paying your attention and learning. Once again, I want to state that we are all most grateful to the respected speaker as well as the one and all who worked and participated in this event. We thank you for being with us this evening. It's been a great pleasure. So thank you very much all for the participation, especially in the situation of a serious pandemic. And take care all. Stay safe. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for a feedback form. Form will be sent to your registered mail ID. So if you are not registered, please